items this morning that we're going to be discussing. The first is a briefing on senior safety. The second is a briefing on the public safety employees, the mental health support services. And the third is the briefing on crime statistics. And for the first one, for senior safety, I'd like to invite, there's a whole group of people that we'd like to invite to please come to the table, and you can sit on either side. I guess everyone is here. So if what we probably should do is begin by having everyone introduce themselves, and then we will ask Susan to give us a background. Please, Angela.
Hi, good morning. Angela Talley, Director of Correction and Rehabilitation.
Good morning. Daryl McSwain, Chief of Police, Park Police.
Good morning. Marcus Jones, Chief of Police, Montgomery County Police.
Good morning. Jim Resnick, Senior Fire Safety Programs.
Scott Goldstein, Fire Rescue.
Darrell Poppin, I'm the Sheriff here in Montgomery County.
Eric Friedman, Office of Consumer Protection.
John McCarthy, State's Attorney.
Odile Brunetto, Aging and Disability Services with the Department of Health and Human Services.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, Susan, if you would like to start us off, please.
Good morning, everyone. Susan Farag, Council staff. Today's first item deals with senior safety, and we have a variety of departments here, primarily representing public safety. I'd like for each department to speak very briefly, about 5 minutes or so, on the different types of senior safety programs they have. And we have representatives here today, as you stated, from Fire and Rescue, Park Police, Consumer Protection, State's Attorney, Montgomery County Police Department, and again, Aging and Disability Services is here from HHS, since all of the agencies work together for various programs that deal with senior safety initiatives. If we could start out with Fire and Rescue, if they could present a little bit about what they do.
So, thank you, Susan. Thank you, Mr. Katz and members of the Public Safety Committee. The influence of our senior safety program is clearly associated with and responsive to the growth in the population. As we know, that population, that segment of the population is growing in such a high rate and such a extraordinary measure that the work that Jim and Beth Ann, who's going to exchange seats with me here in just 1 second, the work that Jim and Beth Ann do in risk reduction in our senior outreach activities is making a difference every day. Every day, roughly 10 times a week, as we're doing these home safety checks, we are seeing opportunities that would have been an injury, opportunities that would have been a catastrophic situation had a fire event occurred in these structures. So I passed to Jim. There's a lot of great information in your packet, and he's going to provide Susan's 5 minutes of cliff notes on that.
All right, and Beth Ann, there's a chair up here, please. No, you don't have to. The chief can stay, and Beth Ann can. I know he would rather sit back where you were, but.
Best laid plans.
Thank you. As the Chief was saying, we do a lot of programs, a lot of outreach and education programs in a variety of different settings. Within the packet, there's information about the various partnerships that we've established, and we continue to grow those partnerships throughout the time that I've been here and throughout the years. The significant impact, as much as we can talk to groups of people about fire safety, fire prevention, what to do in case a fire does occur, having multiple plans, where we can make the greatest impact is in people's homes. That's where they are at risk. And also we're able to get to a lot of folks in their homes who otherwise are not coming to another location. They're not able to get out to a senior center or a place of worship or somewhere like that, but we can spend some quality time with them in their homes. Myself, we have a group of very, very well-trained firefighters who are force multipliers when it comes to senior fire safety and senior outreach. These home safety checks usually take approximately an hour. While we're in the home, we're not only checking smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, but we're going through specific, realistic fire escape plans for them if a situation were to occur. And we spend a lot of time looking at the primary risks within the home, things like combustibles too close to the hot water heater in the furnace, combustibles that are stored in an oven, combustibles too close to the cooking surface. We actually look in the kitchen, spend some significant time in the kitchen there. We look in the bathrooms for fall risks, the stairwells for fall risks, and the list goes on. And this is where we believe we can make the biggest impact. Nationally, this is proven also. As we continue to keep an eye on the research that's going out there, see what the other best practices are. We are the best practice, it seems.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah, I just echo that. Jim is known throughout Montgomery County as the mayor of Seniorville, and wherever he goes, seniors follow. So it's kind of
We have seen the mayor.
you have seen him in action, right? Right. Regardless of whether you're a senior, I would encourage you to call 311 or go on our website and sign up for a home safety check, because just looking at things through the lens of a firefighter is really a dramatic game changer.
And moving forward, some of our biggest challenges are the diversity within the community, including languages. We're reaching out to groups where we're kind of struggling within the ranks of fire rescue to have trained speakers who can speak effectively to these groups on fire safety, fire prevention, injury prevention, and the like. Just the other day, we were at Chinese, the CCACC up in Gaithersburg. We're working with Russian-speaking groups and so on, and we struggle to find good translators. We've been working with some of our partner agencies, WISH, who you probably will hear about or have heard about through Health and Human Services, is a great organization. They've been able to provide some support along the ways, but that's probably one of our biggest struggles. And a changing demographic is the housing stock within Montgomery County. My home, I live in Kensington, is a perfect example. My home was built in 1962, and until about 2 months ago, my home, I was okay with battery-only smoke alarms, and I had transitioned to the 10-year sealed battery smoke alarms like we were supposed to with the law. I recently had some work done on my house, and now my home has hardwired smoke alarms. As firefighters and not electricians, we're somewhat limited in what we can do when we go into those homes that are supposed to have these hardwired alarms. So as we look towards the future, that's one of the challenges that we're going to have, is working with the changing housing stock, which is in many respects a good thing.
Okay. Go ahead, please.
I'm familiar with what you guys are doing. It's incredibly impressive all the way around. I did just have a couple of follow-up questions. So the assessments that are done of homes, are those scheduled, or is it more organic based on, obviously there are times where you're going to be in a home unscheduled because of some issue and take that opportunity to engage families, but are some of these pre-scheduled?
The vast majority of them are. The fire chief, I'm sure, will talk about the after the fire initiatives that we do when there's been an event in a neighborhood. But otherwise, we have people who we either meet through the various programs that we do. They might see advertisements at bus stops and so on. They'll call 311. They'll go on to the ncfrs.org website and request a home safety visit that way. We get a lot of word of mouth, where someone in the neighborhood had us come out and they talk to neighbors and so on. And all of these that we're doing for the most part through my program are their appointments.
Okay.
So as we go about checking smoke alarms, it is our objective and goal on every call, every opportunity we're in the residence to check. Because we're there for a medical emergency, we're there for an electrical short, we're there for other circumstances. Conditions appropriate, when the crew has the opportunity, turn our eyes up, make sure that that residence has a working smoke alarm and the appropriate protection for the residents to get out. So that's every call, every time we're in a residence. As Jim outlined, after the fire is a saturation campaign, as you see in some of those other communications, is after Cider Mill's event on Friday morning, go back out to Cider Mill Apartments that day, usually within 24 hours, go door to door, not scheduled because we're doing it timely to the event at hand, and offer information. People have questions about what happened on the fire, why was this, why was that, answering those questions, and in turn providing checks of smoke alarms and critical home safety function. It was definitely, Mr. Councilmember, a hybrid of most of the home safety checks, the 10 per week, are scheduled through 311 and through our web request form. But then every call, we're checking smoke alarms when we're in a residence, and then after the fire, we do, door to door, providing information.
The reason I ask is because I think we may have the opportunity to connect a couple of dots. I think our Villages program has been very successful in a number of different levels, and they're doing well in recruiting younger, older adults to engage and volunteer. I am working with Senator Ben Cramer right now to introduce a bill at the state level to provide a tax credit for people over the age of 65 who volunteer. And I think I'm using my parents as an example, who are from South America and are obviously fluent and very engaged and want to do more. This would be the perfect kind of service project that I think they would really enjoy, get a lot of energy from. But it also would require you guys having the capacity to coordinate that volunteer component, which is a job all unto itself. Would you have some capacity to help coordinate from a volunteer perspective, maybe folks who do speak a second language that may want to come with you on some of these visits to help and facilitate with the translation?
The short answer is I love that idea, and again, using the term force multiplier,
Right.
if we can get folks within any community spun up on what they should be doing, and the description we give is walk into a room and look up.
Right.
What's up there? Are there sprinklers? Are there smoke alarms? What kind of condition are they in, and so on, and if we can do that. I'll actually let the chief or Beth Ann talk more directly to what would be involved with, I hate to say it, the liability
Sure.
and so on of bringing folks along on these visits.
If we could please, and I want you to answer, but we do have 5 other people.
Yeah.
So 5 other groups.
It's something we could get you feedback on about the expanded capabilities. The Beth Ann Shop and Risk Reduction is a small core group. If there is an opportunity to have that force multiplier or additional volunteer capacity, one of the things we could work them into is our FRS volunteer activities, as well as possibly expand Jim's capability and tagging a Jim's avatar and having other capabilities there.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys. That's helpful.
You had another one, Gabe?
Nope,
No?
I'm good.
Tom, please.
Jim, thanks. I think this is a terrific program. I know I've described it when I speak to, say, civic associations or something, but do you have any, either both a paragraph or a couple sentences that explains it really well the way you want it explained, and do you have any shareable social media? Winter obviously presents seasonal fire risks. It would be, I think it's people are not aware enough of it, and there's a lot of people that would take advantage if we could get to them.
Beth Ann, you want to speak to what we do social media?
Yeah, we have a pretty significant presence on social media. So again, the word of the day is force multipliers, but any of those, we work closely with the regional service centers. So any groups, civic associations, they're great avenues to get our safety information out.
You could send us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to send you. Absolutely.
Okay,
Thank you.
terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drucker.
Any other part of the presentation, Chief?
Not for fire, no, sir.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Park Police. Please.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Again, pleasure. This is an area of expanded outreach for us in the Park Police, and we certainly see the need for it. As you might imagine, our seniors love the park system, regularly walk through the park system day and night. And, of course, we come across them as well at the recreation centers and faith community groups, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a population that we not only see that's growing, but also is still precious to us as well. So one of the things we've begun to do is, first of all, educate our staff. All of our staff members have gone through a training on elder abuse, so that they're also familiar with understanding signs and potential vulnerabilities for that community itself, whether it's financial issues, elder abuse, et cetera. And that includes our dispatchers as well within our agency. One of the things we have been doing for a couple of years is we provide an on-site and also in-community sort of presentation on safety in general as far as physical safety. We call it a rape aggression defense program. It's something that's generally known within the law enforcement community. We teach you self-awareness and some other things, of course, that they have concerns about. We are starting a drug take-back program, very similar to what the county's already been doing for a number of years as well. So we'll continue to advertise that. And as alluded to before, we have found that the senior community is now that much more engaged with social media as well. So as we begin to expand our website, we also want to expand our presence on social media as far as some of the educational programs that we will be offering as well. In addition, we were in the process now of formalizing our search and rescue program. As you might imagine, we literally have millions of people that utilize the park system on an annual basis. Sometimes those with developmental disabilities and or autism, dementia, etc., either elope or just simply lose their way, if you will. We are in the process now of not only increasing our search and rescue capabilities as far as additional bloodhounds, but also we want to work on the front end as far as the educational piece. So when we go to the different community centers and talk to the caretakers, we also educate them on things that they can do to perhaps maybe, I wouldn't say harden the home, if you will, or the facility, but make it that much less likely that they can either elope and or, if they do, how best can we find them more quickly. Of course, working with Project Lifesaver and others, we hope to be able to do that as well and contribute to this need. So that's a nutshell version of some of the things that we do.
And we appreciate that. You know, the one question I didn't ask this of the fire, but are there expansion opportunities that you think we should be exploring? I mean, obviously, Councilmember Almenaz has come up with one for fire as an expansion, but is there any, when anybody makes their presentation, we'd like to know that as well. I mean, obviously, there's budget implications, but you know, some things you can't afford not to do.
I am truly a believer. I've seen it firsthand that Project Lifesaver could not be more funded, if you will. There is more that can be done with that program. It literally saves lives. There are certain items that need to be purchased, if you will, with that program. More notification, advertisement of the program, I think would be very helpful. And it literally can save lives, especially in inclement weather where time is of the essence. Being able to locate the individuals with not only the handheld device that's utilized, but also the device that they would wear themselves can literally be the difference between life and death.
Good. Okay. Anyway, go ahead.
Just a quick comment, although not specifically related to your guys' work, I know the Parks Department has been doing a lot in the way of enhancing prevention-based programs, because social isolation is a huge issue, and the Parks Department is uniquely equipped to help address some of that by getting people active, but also joining social clubs with, you know, to be able to walk the parks, walk trails, which is sort of a sister benefit to the work that you guys are doing. So that's really important.
One of the things I'll mention as well as far as expansion, one of the things that we're looking to do, you see them all over college campuses, those little blue lights or blue phones, if you will. I think there's certain parks that are utilized so much that we should probably consider expanding some of those, if you will, in different locations. We do have to look at the balance between, obviously, false calls, if you will, vandalism, but that can be mitigated with certain things such as a camera that's attached to the dispatch center and some others. But not only does it give a sense of greater safety, if you will, but it's also something that's readily available for those who, again, may find themselves lost and or in need of finding public safety assistance relatively quickly.
And to that idea, the question about whether whether the cell phones are available in throughout the parks, and if there's a place where they're not, we certainly should have something like that as well.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we're doing now is we continue to enhance our CAD system is additional GPS capabilities whereby it automatically brings up a person's GPS coordinates if they try to reach us by cell phone. That's something we're also looking to do as well.
Good.
I totally agree.
Any other questions of the committee? No. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to hear from Consumer Protection.
Good morning. The Office of Consumer Protection focuses on financial safety and financial crimes. And if there's anything kind that we can say about scammers, is that they don't discriminate to the extent that they're happy to rip off everyone and anyone. And the services that our office provides is to all residents and businesses in Montgomery County, but certainly we try to focus on on seniors. The one thing that we think is most important is to make sure that Montgomery County is a silo-free department and silo-free county, and that is we work with all the different agencies here to deal with financial crimes and financial safety. Everything that we do is on Circle 8 and 9. You also can see, following up on Circles 10 through about 15, that we do a lot of outreach events with elected officials, council members, congressmen, state senators, state delegates as well. Although I do have to say that the Office of Consumer Affairs tends to be the warm-up act for the State's Attorney's Office and John McCarthy at most of these events, and his team. But the importance really is that we do work together with all the different agencies and try and focus on reaching seniors. I mean, the biggest challenge that we see is one of outreach. As the fire department indicated, being able to get to the information to consumers who are seniors, who may not be going out to many different events, who may not be on social media and things of that sort. But what we try to do is really work together as a team.
Okay. Anything else? Go ahead, please.
Are you seeing trends, Eric? I mean, it feels like the level of sophistication of some of these is really getting higher. What are you seeing out there in terms of trends that are potentially alarming?
Well, that's an excellent point. The level of sophistication of the scammers is in fact increasing. They have to be very clever, otherwise they have to have regular jobs like the rest of us. So we see that every day. Just to give a quick example, we did a very good job of teaching and educating consumers not to be fooled by these phony lotteries that are out there. They get information in the mail, and we actually got from the post office where they were delivering huge amounts to seniors, saying that you had won a lottery scam. And so what the scammers did is they raised the bar by becoming a little bit more sophisticated. Now, instead of just sending a document that says you've won $1 million lottery, they send you a document that says you've won $1 million lottery, and here is a check in the amount of $50,000 as the first payment towards that amount of money. And the check is as real as it could possibly be, with watermarks and security features on it. So one trend would be to up our game as well in terms of being able to educate consumers that even if you get a check in the mail, because at that point they say, well, I know I shouldn't respond to a phony lottery, but look, this one is real. They actually sent me a check. And so that's an example of when we do education, it's great, but then we have to up it again to keep up with the scammers. So, but otherwise, in terms of scams and trends, it's really just focusing on the electronic economy, digital economy, and we know for sure that for every financial scam, there's an element of trickery, and it's just figuring out. And unfortunately, to a great extent, we have to play a catch-up game. We can't anticipate what the next trick is going to be, but when we see it, we have to be able to respond pretty swiftly.
So my parents, they were targeted a couple of years ago, and your office was incredibly helpful in addressing an issue. What is the best way to report when somebody suspects or is concerned that this issue has arisen? What's the best way to report that? Is it through your office? Is it through some federal entity? And when it is reported, what's the value in that? Are you in fact finding that has an impact?
Well, there are federal agencies that you can report it to. I mean, if we can find out about a scam, the sooner the better, and we can work together with everyone to get the information out there. It's a difficult situation because the scams never do stop, so reporting it to our office, we can get the information then over to the correct federal agency, things of that sort. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we're facing in our new marketplace. I mean, just number one is you cannot ever trust caller ID. It is 100% something that you shouldn't even look at, because it's so easy for anyone to spoof it, to make it look like the call is coming from the sheriff's office, to make it look like the call is coming from the police department, to make it look like it's coming from any cell number that you want. So the message there is just at this point in time, with the technology that we have today, is to never trust anything that the caller ID says, and never disclose any information over the phone when you're receiving the call, because you really don't know who's on the other end of the computer. You don't know who's on the other end of the telephone. So these are the kinds of basic messages that we try and get out there. robocalling is such a huge thing. We've had all the seniors know about all the telephone scams, the IRS scam, people saying that the sheriff is coming out to arrest you scams, all those telephone scams. So, as we talked about in the presentations, is the most dangerous thing in your home might not be your stove or your furnace. May actually be the telephone, because that's where seniors can be harmed the most. Not because they're less educated, but because perhaps they're more trustworthy. And they grew up at a time when you trusted what the caller ID said, you trusted what the person on the other end of the phone said because they sounded pretty legitimate, and all the times that we've had scams. Sometimes, your parents and my mother are some of the best ways of getting information because we see how they respond and we see what they're receiving. And I know, for example, at my mother's home, 94 years old, she receives robocalls at the rate of about 8 to 10 a day. It's absolutely... she keeps track of it. It's 8 to 10 a day. And so it's just a matter of at what point, when she turns 95, perhaps then she'll be scammed. But that's the kind of thing that we're facing for our families.
And there is a stigma. It's embarrassing. If somebody has been taken advantage of, they may be less likely to come forward. And so that is something that we're going to have to continue to combat as well. So, all right. Thank you.
Sorry, just to follow up. Eric, I'm sure your mom is a highly trained consumer, but do you have any way to track how many people are scammed by these folks and whether it's the number of calls presumably is increasing? Do you have?
No, I mean the number of robocalls. I think there was a press release we just got recently that it was millions in the month of October. I mean, just an incredible number. It's just beyond belief. And the truth of the matter is the government has been fighting robocalls for over 15 years, has been losing the battle, and will never be able to succeed in that battle until the technology of the service providers catches up, because that's the only way it's ever going to get resolved. But in terms of numbers, it's just beyond belief.
The service providers are cooperating and they're limited by their technology?
Well, until they enable the technology that they must have to be able to check the calls that are going through and stop it before it actually goes out. I mean, the federal government's working with the FCC to give them the ability to do that. But what the government's been doing has been going on for over 15 years and has not solved the problem with robocalls. There's absolutely no reason that the technology cannot be used to have the telephone service providers checking those calls and preventing them from reaching consumers.
Right. Are there areas of state legislation you're pushing in this area for the upcoming session?
Mostly federal. We do have a state law regarding robocalls, but it's not quite enough to. It talks about preventing them with the intent to deceive, but the technology really has to catch up with the mechanism that's out there that can generate millions and billions of calls.
Right. And you mentioned legislative enhancements. Are there state bills you think need to be introduced in this? And have you been in touch with Melanie?
There may be some, and we are working with the county's delegation as well when we can address and identify some. We can look back and see if there's some specific ones that can be done. I'm not sure how much can be done at a county level.
Right.
But keep in mind, and Tracy Rizvani of our staff is here too, and put out information on our newsletters talking about things like bots. When you realize that about 50% of the email messages that are generated are not even generated by humans; they're generated by automated equipment. So these are the kinds of adversities that we're going up against.
Right. And is romance scams a new area of focus, or is that something I was unaware of?
Well, romance has been around for a long time, and continues.
That'll
to
be a whole nother public safety discussion. Yeah.
Okay, we'll schedule that briefing.
It's still there, and it's one of the various senior scams that are out there, the romance scams, for various reasons. People tend to be lonely, and you also have a natural tendency to help and believe what other people are saying. So romance scams are out there as part of. They get updated, but to a great extent, it hasn't changed.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, we're going to hear from the state's attorney. You were the opening act for the state's attorney once again, Eric.
As usual.
Please.
Well, good morning, John McCarthy, State Attorney. Can I say maybe an answer to I think maybe Gabe's question?
Is your mic on? You?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. If you could speak up a little bit, please.
May I say, I think public education is the key to addressing crime of the nature that Eric was mainly talking about. And I've thought that for a very, very long time. That's why public outreach is so important. That's why, my Crimes Against Senior and Vulnerable Adults Unit did 35 community events last year. I've done events, Mr. Katz, you and I have done multiple events together. I've done them with former county council members, and Mr. Friedson is also now joining us as we're sort of on tour talking to seniors across the county. We do, myself, I do a lot of lectures for groups, Live and Learn, Oasis, Johns Hopkins, Brandeis Group. I did about 50, and it's almost all a senior audience. I've got an Oasis group of about 100 tomorrow. But we do outreach on Spanish as well as television, and we do our outreach both in English, Korean, and Mandarin, trying to serve, again, the diverse culture that's here in Montgomery County. But number one, it's education. When people say, who would you tell a victim of a crime to call? It's really hard to say. I mean, if the call originates in Eastern Europe, really, the reach of Maryland or any local jurisdiction is not going to be all that great. And most of those calls do not originate anywhere near the geographic boundaries of Montgomery County. So that's why I think, as Eric mentioned, it really is much more of a federal problem. And if you're going to look for a national solution, it's within the phone providers and within the federal government. We do have a Crimes Against Senior Vulnerable Adult Unit. And I would say, as I listen to some, I've really been impressed by some of the other things that other agencies are doing, particularly Scott's agency recently when he was talking about getting into people's homes. It's really kind of a great idea. We've been working on this as a strategic plan for about 5 years. We know that we are exploding as a senior population. We're serving over 200,000 people. 17,000 Americans turn 65 every day in this country. We have both of my team leaders, Debbie Feinstein and Brian Roslin, are here with me, as well as my program administrator in that Crimes Against Seniors unit. And there are two specialty units, and as soon as you say it, it's obvious that these are different skill sets. There's a lot of financial frauds that are targeted against seniors, 90% of which originate with their family members, by the way. Only about 10% of financial fraud against seniors comes from non-family members. But obviously, having someone be able to look at spreadsheets and do that, that's a specialized kind of unit, and Brian heads that. Whether it's neglect, sexual abuse, physical abuse, that comes under Debbie Feinstein, and that's a separate unit. And we have teams of lawyers as well as program administrators and legal assistants working in those two different units, and they are trained uniquely to do those events. In 2018, that's the last year for which we have complete numbers, we had 538 abused person intakes in Montgomery County, 538. We opened 44 full investigations, and the bad news is we already at 82 for 2019. So we are more than double last year's numbers this year in looking at cases involving seniors, and that's both financial as well as physical or neglect. It's all categories of crimes. You did receive a report sent to the council last year in 2018, which was a 3-year report for 2015 to 2017. If you want to historically look back and look at the numbers, they're there available, and we sent that over to you. We're very proud in terms of public outreach to the program that we run here in World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. Kathy Greenlee, who was head of the Department of Aging under the Obama administration, it was one of these days where we were at 2 different locations, and some of you in this room were, I know Darren, my friend, was here. We went to one location, and then Kathy Greenlee spoke at that, and then she went to the second location, and she stood up and said, "This is the first time I've gone anywhere in the United States to a standing room only crowd for a senior event, and the only other time was this morning when I went to the first event you had here in Montgomery County, and then our second one, it was standing room only." And I will. That goes to Mario's here. I saw Mario is here, and again, Kelly Davis has a lot to do with that in our office, but we do a great event, and we bus people in. It's anybody wants to put it on your calendar. It's June 16th next year. Please come. It's a wonderful event. We do participate in the Elder Vulnerable Adult Task Force. That particular organization is a governmental agencies all meet together. They have a holistic approach to how they're going to address events. One of the tasks that's been recently added is actually death investigations. We've done this for kids for many times. When children died in child abuse cases, we always had a critical group of people that came together to study what could possibly have been done to prevent that child from. We're now doing that for seniors as well. We are still looking at active cases and how to proceed, and sometimes because you are dealing with multiple agencies, maybe it's going to be a criminal prosecution. Or maybe it's going to be the county filing for a guardianship for an individual. Maybe some other agency may have an idea of what they can do, but it's a holistic approach to addressing issues involving adults, not always just crimes. We advertise and promote our programs on our website. We publish all of our brochures, again, in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean, in addition to English, and we attend the community events I noted above. Do we have public-private? I'm going to cheat off my friend. I looked at Eric's list. We basically connect with all of those same groups. All of the same groups. We have the same partnerships, and I will tell you, Debbie and I were talking about this as we were coming over. One of the things I will say, and I'm proud of my organization, I think in many times we become the conveners. When there is an identified instance of abuse against a senior, it will be, generally speaking, the state's attorney's office that will call the other community partners together to sit down and say, okay, this case has been identified for us. Let's bring in our partners. How are we going to deal with it in the fashion I talked about earlier? Do we have plans for moving forward? The answer is yes. This really goes back to Mr. Katz's question to someone earlier. And I will tell you, even though the open investigations have sparked markedly, do we have needs? We support the Abused Persons Program getting more investigators. The limitation of our ability to handle more of these cases is our ability to investigate them. APS, what did I say? APS. APS. The ability of APS to investigate hampers our ability to open these cases. And in terms of the internal operation, that we have financial investigators. We don't really internally investigate a lot of the crimes in Montgomery County, but we do a lot of the complex financial crimes against seniors. The chief's people over at Montgomery County, Chief Jones, they do almost all of our investigations, and then we get them at the back end. But we need additional financial investigators to help us. A financial crime case against a senior is tremendously complex. Lots of bank records, spreadsheets, lots of unraveling, and we just need more investigators. The work is there. We just simply do not have the capacity to serve all the need that we have, and it's only going to grow and has been growing.
All right, so can you talk a little bit more about that then? You get a complaint, a concern, a crime has been committed about financial issues, and then you have to have someone that goes in and does the forensics of that? How does that work?
Yeah, we have investigators in our unit, and what will happen is Brian, who's the team leader, will normally assign or have Dave Newcomer, who many in this room know. Dave is a former police officer who's been an investigator in my office for many years. Dave will either take the case himself or assign it to one of our other investigators. And the first thing is probably a sit-down with the complaining witness for the person to come in with the financial records for them to lay out for us what they've been able to gather. Maybe it's somebody that's handling an estate. Maybe it's a family of 4 kids, and maybe one of the kids now realizes that in the last year that mom was alive, one of their siblings took all the stocks, the bonds, transferred the title to the family's home, and has committed fraud against mom or against everybody else. There will be an initial sit-down, and then they'll make a determination as to whether it's criminal or not. Maybe it's not criminal. Whether or not there's additional information to be done, but it stays with our investigator for a very, very long time with the consultation of an attorney who will be assigned by Brian to work with the investigator on that case. and maybe I'll ask Brian, of the percentage of cases we review at an investigator level, what percentage do we actually wind up indicting?
I wouldn't know that number right off the top of my head, but it's definitely not all. It's, I would say, around 50 to 60%. But where we're getting killed right now is what comes in from Adult Protective Services.
If you're going to, yeah, please.
Can you step up on it?
Yeah.
What comes in from Adult Protective Services, we review all of their intakes that they have. And we, frankly, rely on the social workers to do some of the initial screening to figure out, is this likely to be a crime or potentially a crime that we would want to look at? And they don't have the bodies to do it. So while we could certainly use particularly somebody that's specifically for the crimes against seniors and vulnerable adults, it's in the Adult Protective Services where we, if the county is thinking about it, that's where we need the priorities right now. Because they're trained both, obviously, to deal with physical situations, but they're also trained to deal with financial situations. And for them to be able to gather and basically spot the red flags and say, uh-oh, this is a family problem, but it looks like there's some criminal overtures here, then that gets referred to us, and then we do, like Mr. McCarthy said, starting that process.
Well, the fact that you have Councilmember Albernas, who chairs HHS here as well, the question is, if we do, when we do, candidly, hire someone in addition, where they would be, and if they're in HHS, could you use that information that they get for the criminal prosecution?
Yes, and that's part of our Elder and Vulnerable Adult Abuse Task Force, is we have a memorandum of understanding amongst all the different groups that participate in that, so we're able to share information back and forth. And in part, the social workers' rapport that they build with these victims is a useful piece for us to do the preliminary gathering of information. But yes, we do share information with county agencies only.
Anything else? Any questions from the committee?
I'm interested in joining a roadshow, so we'd be honored to do it, particularly as you reach out to multi-ethnic populations.
Eric screens.
Yeah. Great.
I have seen their roadshow. It's actually very, very good. I hate to give either one of them a compliment, but it's very, very good. It really is. Okay. Any other questions? No? If not, we're going to hear from Montgomery County Police. Please, Chief.
Good morning. Marcus Jones, the Chief of Police. So our department is engaged in a variety of different programs for seniors in a variety of different ways. And the bulk of our work is done through a program called Keeping Seniors Safe. And this program is jointly operated by our Community Engagement Division and our Volunteer Resources section. And it's a volunteer program. It goes all the way back to the 1990s of our folks who provide training and programs to our seniors throughout the county. And it focused on a lot of things such as safety tips, fraud, scams, and identity theft and prevention, which we get a lot of these calls for service in Montgomery County. Like in 2017, as an example, we did over 59 of these presentations for about over 1,100 people in Montgomery County. So that gives just an idea of some of the outreach that we do. Again, talking about fraud, that is something again that's that we are seeing, and particularly amongst the senior population in a very strong sense. 2019, we've conducted. Our fraud section alone has done 20 presentations, and they do. Not only are they doing the presentations, but these are your fraud investigators. These are the ones who are boots on the ground, who are doing a lot of this. And whenever we get the interested community groups, they will go out and do these types of presentations in order to make sure our folks understand what are these scams, what are these frauds, and how we actually go about investigating these crimes against vulnerable adults. Right now in that unit, we have 6 members investigators so their ability to provide that outreach is somewhat limited based upon just the numbers of folks. So we have to do some joint work with our community services officers who work in our district stations and they are trained to actually do these presentations as well in many of our community, senior programs all throughout the county, whether it be a retirement village or other, whether it be a faith-based unit, we will go out and do those. And so with that being said, those units, also the fraud unit, has done some extensive work with our federal partners, such as the FBI and the Secret Service. And in fact, we have a Secret Service, a couple folks on the task force who actually work with our guys on a daily basis to conduct investigations. We have done some investigations on some of these types of financial scams where we've actually gone federal to prosecute individuals that are responsible for it. And again, as noted earlier today, it's very difficult when you're really, focusing on phone calls that are being spoofed, coming in from, from Asia, coming in from Europe, and we know that based upon some of the information we get via our federal partners, that we know that information is coming from overseas, as these people are trying to scam our particularly our adult community. But it happens all throughout the entire county. For like Eric stated, there's no rhyme or reason there. They don't discriminate based on simply age. Similarly, when we talk about our community engagement division, they do work on a quarterly basis. They meet with Age Friendly Montgomery, and they've done some other types of training, such as our active shooter safety training for our seniors. But we also wanted to, make sure that we're looking at doing some expansion with that. We also work with our traffic division and senior driving safety issues with the NVA. We partner with them to provide training to families who have elderly drivers. I remember, my grandmother who lived to be 93, but she didn't give up her license. And she was. But we always, as a family, you were always concerned about her driving at her age. So we would always just make sure that she was okay to drive, and that's important. And I know there's a lot of families who feel the same way. As Mr. McCarthy stated earlier, when we talk about our elder abuse, we do have our Special Victims Investigative Division that handles our elder abuse crimes that come out of the Family Justice Center, and they are actively, and they again, that unit is partially connected to the domestic violence unit. So again, the caseload can be extremely heavy, and they have their share of caseloads as it relates to elder abuse types of allegations that we have to investigate, determine whether there's a crime, and then if there is a crime, to work with the state's attorney's office in regards to the prosecution. And as I noted, when I talk about our community services officers in each of the district stations who do tremendous outreach to our retirement communities, as well as our assisted living communities within their districts, to go and do several types of presentations for them to assist them with senior safety. And as Chief McSwain noted earlier, one of our major concerns, of course, is our elderly community, particularly with those who may be suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's in many different ways. And we see those folks that will go missing in many of the crucial times, particularly this time of the year when the weather is turning very cold. And I will tell you, we have search management teams that are specially trained. And when we talk about where can we go from here, I will tell you the amount of calls that those teams get on a daily basis to actually search, not only for our seniors, but with kids that are autistic or some other critical missing, a person that we are out there searching for with all of the resources that we can muster. But I will tell you, I have literally one person that is designated to oversee, and we have some decentralized folks that help us. But that, with the growing seniors community, I will tell you, when I look at a vision for what's coming up in the future, that is something that we're going to need to grow. Because again, from a safety perspective, and really trying to get, have positive results of finding our folks in a crucial time, these folks will provide some phenomenal services of really with the dogs that are trained and some of the other equipment, and just because of their expertise, we've had tremendous success in many cases of finding our folks in a very timely manner. So that would be just something I would look at that, and then I will also look at, we are going to expand our community engagement division so that we can have a greater outreach, in particularly in the senior community. So,
Is there any technology that we should be looking at in addition? I mean, obviously the dogs are a great help, but
yes. Well, I noticed an article the other day about drones, for example, in Howard County. And I know there's been a lot of people who have their concerns about drones, about how police would use them. I would tell you the number one use would be in the search for missing people, particularly when we look at some of our parks, when we look at some of the rural areas in our counties. I will tell you, we can put some extensive manpower on the ground to actually do those searches. But when you have something that's up in the air that has the ability to see for, in many cases, probably up to a large area in a very short period of time via really video for the person on the ground that's operating that drone, I think that is something that we seriously need to consider, that needs to be an active program for Montgomery County Police.
Okay, very good.
And I will mention also to that point, in the development of our search and rescue program, in addition to recently naming a coordinator who's certified, we have also recently purchased 3 drones, one of which has thermal imaging to it, because at nighttime, obviously, you can't see per se, but you can pick up heat signatures, which can be, of course, a life and death situation. We're still in the process of developing policy and making sure we cross all the T's and dot all the I's as it relates to the legal ramifications, FAA, et cetera, et cetera. But that is a growing initiative. And matter of fact, we've got a meeting scheduled with the county's search and rescue manager in the very near future to share resources one with another.
Good. Any other questions from the committee? Thank you very much, Chief. And next is Aging and Disability Services through HHS.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for convening this discussion here. So, Odile Brunetto, I am with HHS, Aging and Disability Services.
I'm going to ask you to please keep your voice
Sure.
up a little bit.
Sure thing. And so, as you have heard from our colleagues around the table, we are very fortunate to be working very collaboratively together, and that has been long-standing for multiple years. So we have a lot of fantastic relationships with our colleagues around the table. So Adult Protective Services, we call it APS, is a state mandate, and we serve persons who are over the age of 18, all the way, obviously, to folks who are all the way 100 and plus. And our staff is required to investigate reports of abuse, neglect, sex neglect, and exploitation. And our team are comprised of social workers who are obviously licensed and trained in APS. And they go into the home and they evaluate the situation, they gather information, and develop a plan to remedy the situation. And as you have heard from others, the growth of the senior population also is evidence in our APS work. Over the past 5 years, we have had a double number of investigations that we have conducted. And 34% of those investigations are related to financial exploitation. As you heard from our colleagues, those financial exploitation are extremely time-consuming. You have to delve into a lot of documents, bank reports, etc. And so that is really a challenge for us. We also have served 1,100 people this past fiscal year. And regretfully, we are on track. This is the first quarter. We are on track to serve about the same number again. We are projecting that this is going to be, again, another very difficult year. We work closely with all of the partners that we have heard in the community. We work with hospitals, with nursing homes. We work with the villages. We work with Meals on Wheels, etc. And we really couldn't do our work without the wonderful collaboration and partnerships we have with everyone. The Montgomery County Commission on Aging has been concerned about the growth of APS situation, and I just want to point out that our chair, Dr. Dean Windy, is there from the Commission on Aging. They have written a letter to the state, to the governor, to our governor, pointing out that there is a huge increase of APS cases, and this is a state program, and the state needs to pay attention to this, especially as the governor prepares his budget for next fiscal year. And so, as you have heard from our colleagues, everybody's cheering for more APS social workers. I am really proud to say that our APS administrator, Mario, who is sitting right behind there, is known as a national trainer for APS. He has gone all around the country to train others. And we have embarked our APS social worker in a national certification. This is a new program offered by the National Association of APS. And the certification is a long process. You need to take 26 training modules, so that's very time consuming. And those people are super busy, so it's going to take a couple of years before we finish our certification, but we are about a third into it.
Very good.
I guess just connecting a couple of dots, and John, I'm processing what you talked about earlier, that something like 90% is within families. But not, it's a surprisingly large number, not surprising that it's happening, but I wonder, and education is so important, but what proactive steps can families take from a financial standpoint to help prepare to avoid some of these issues? And then when you are involving families, I imagine that apart from the complication of going through the logistics of the paperwork and all of the banking information, which is itself complicated, then you add the layer of the family dynamics, which must also get in the way. So obviously social work is one component of that, but from a preventative step, are there things, or Eric, if you're aware of steps that people can take to prevent financial situations from arising in the first place?
I think it's a lot like domestic violence when it comes to financial fraud. It's isolation.
Mm-hmm.
When only one person is seeing the financial records, and there's no communication. They're not talking to each other. I mean, I think it's where family members need to talk and need
Mm-hmm.
to have either someone independent who's not connected to being ultimately going to receive that money. But I think it's conversation among the families and oversight by multiple members of the family seeing those documents, not just one person, so that a year after mom dies and the things being distributed, you realize the house in Rehoboth, the house in Bethesda, all the stocks, all the bonds are in Mary's name and nobody else gets anything.
Mm-hmm.
And people are just stunned. They don't see it coming. And it might be the adult that moved into the house to take care of mom.
Because I know with driving, as an example, there are lots of really great resources that families can utilize to help facilitate what is a very emotional conversation. But that we actually, again, using my family as an example, used when my grandmother could no longer drive. And it was AAA that had a very helpful guide that we ended up using to take care of some of those steps. If there's a resource like that that's available in the financial sector, it'd be helpful to know. And if there isn't, if there's something that we could devise here locally within the county that might be worth developing, maybe even with some of our federal partners, that would be helpful. I wouldn't be surprised if AARP or some of the other national-based organizations had such a tool, but it'd be helpful to know if something
Maybe
like that
even Social
existed.
Security would have something,
Yeah.
some sort of.
Can I invite Debbie,
Sure,
Debbie
please,
to come
yeah.
up and because she can tell you a little bit about maybe some of the strategic planning that's ongoing in the county regarding the answers to your question.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you for being here.
Debbie Feinstein with the State's Attorney's Office. So we hand out a lot of materials at all these information sessions. I mean, that representatives from all of our agencies attend. FINRA has materials, AARP has materials, the National Center for Aging, or NCEA in California generates a lot of materials that we hand out. We have posters, we have had signs on ride-on buses. We run that campaign typically every June, where we have the signs on ride-on buses that really try to alert people. I think the biggest issue is getting people to recognize and know that this happens, and it's family members and it's also caregivers that we see that really have a unique opportunity to isolate and take advantage of the person that they're caring for. So it's family members that are in a position to care, and then the caregivers that are hired, and then the family members aren't as involved. And I think it goes back to what you said earlier, Mr. Albernoz, about the isolation piece and the importance of social connections. We do a lot of speaking on that exact issue around the county so that people understand that the social isolation is one of the biggest risk factors, and engaging in community like the villages and some of the initiatives that are being put forward by Age Friendly Montgomery are really critical in order to diminish abuse in general. And I think one of the other things that we see that I think hasn't been talked about a lot today is that we see a lot of overlap between the physical abuse and neglect and the financial exploitation, because it becomes to the abuser's advantage to not only isolate but to neglect and have the senior decline in order to take advantage of them financially. And the reason that Mr. McCarthy put together, my boss put together our unit the way that it's put together is to be able to combat those issues simultaneously, and APS does the same thing, and really looking at holistically and having people understand that it's a holistic thing that you have to look at, and really receiving that education and being willing to hear it is critically important. Like domestic violence was 20 years ago, really elder abuse, everyone says elder abuse is the new domestic violence. I mean, that sounds sort of a bizarre statement to say, but it's not new. It's just coming more into consciousness because of the number of seniors that in our community and really around the country, the numbers are increasing so dramatically as people age and live longer. And I think there needs to be a greater focus on it across the board. And I know Age Friendly Montgomery's working on it. Our task force is working on it. The Commission on Aging is working on it. I mean, all of the wonderful people at the table are really collaboratively on it together. But, resources is always an issue. If we could run bus signs all year, that would be phenomenal. If those red flags could go around the county. But again, from a resources perspective, I think what was being said earlier by my colleague, Mr. Roslin, and by Mr. McCarthy, and by Ms. Bonetto, with respect to the need for more forensic accounting and more forensic investigators to actually dig into these cases and hold offenders accountable and get that on the front page of the Washington Post, that's important too.
And to the point that Gabe made earlier about the stigma and the embarrassment, and there is that concern, and of course, at some point, the person who's being abused doesn't want to get their family member in trouble. I mean, they know that person is doing wrong, if they still have the ability to know that person, but they don't want to do that. So we have to get past that. But there's a special place in hell for somebody that does this. I mean, let's face facts.
I mean, and I think what you're saying is, I know it is 100% true. We've had last year at our World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, we had several actual individuals who had been victimized. We had someone, a direct victim speak, and then family members of a victim speak. And frankly, that was the most powerful piece of that whole presentation, because they're speaking from experience. And the victim that spoke, and it's not unique to her, we've heard this time and time again, how embarrassing it is, how ashamed they are. These are people that are educated, have had fantastic careers, and then suddenly they're finding themselves so vulnerable, and they don't want to say anything to anyone. Again, much like domestic violence, frankly, but there's so much shame surrounding it, and part of our goal is to get that stigma removed so that people understand that, you are not alone. This is happening over and over and over again in our county, and coming forward is the way that we're going to stop it. And you don't have to be in the spotlight when you come forward, but we have to be able to root it out in order to stop it. Because some of these neighbors, we've had these cases where, a neighbor or a caregiver, they will prey on person after person after person. And there's not a registry, there's nothing like this. So it happens over and over and over again.
Okay, good. We have a couple other agencies sitting at the table. Not that if you have anything that you would share for corrections.
I'll just be brief.
Okay, please.
The good news that you hear today is that the collaboration around this table of all of us working together. The difficult challenge for you all is to kind of figure out where the dollars would best be spent moving forward. As Mr. McCarthy mentioned, 15,000 people are turning 65 for the next 10 years, every single day in this country, which will make Montgomery County's population a significant increase and a significant population of consortium of all of these things that you've heard today. And I just as an illustration, my friend Eric sitting next to me talked a little bit about some of the scams, and the jury duty scam, as you're well aware of that scam personally, maybe not personally, but within your family.
What he's referring to is my wife actually got one of those calls, and I ultimately called the sheriff right afterwards, and they called the person, and it actually started from a jail inside Georgia. Yeah, very nice. Very
And
nice.
just as an illustration, you know, that is becoming, because everyone in Montgomery County that usually have a driver's license or registers to vote is subject to become a juror. And so there's the population to target, especially in over 65 category, is huge. And, you know, I have a sheriff's deputy that works very closely with the county police fraud investigators as well as the Secret Service, and it was not too long ago that there was about 10 people in that prison that you mentioned down in Georgia that were all arrested as part of this investigation. That next day, within 24 hours, the phone calls started again because my office was starting to get these phone calls again. So, I mean, it's just something that is very hard to get a hold of. It's hard to stop. The education is incredibly important as part of this. And 2 weeks ago, there was a woman who called my office that she actually fell for this. She gave the caller access to $800 to not have the sheriff come and arrest her for not showing up for jury duty. Fortunately, we were able to get in touch with the Green Dot, and they didn't fund it, so she wasn't actually out of the money. But that was really, in most cases, we don't know because people are embarrassed and really don't call. But this is something that's going on every day and very difficult for all of us. Collaboratively, we are all working together, but it's the forces coming from outside of Montgomery County in most cases that it's hard to keep up on. And I'll just close by mentioning Councilman Rabinos a little earlier when he was talking to Chief Goldstein, mentioned something about younger seniors, and I would love for him to define what younger seniors is, because I may resemble that, so I'm just not sure where his numbers are kind of falling into place. And at some point, you don't have to do that now, Gabe, but at some point in the future, well, I'm looking for, I heard tax break, and I was just wondering what that was. So, thank you, Mr. Tax.
Thank you. And I was going to casually mention to my wife, if she's listening, that the sheriff said something about over 65. I did not go there. Right. Yeah. And anything from corrections, please?
Well, I'll just briefly say I appreciate what everybody said today. It has given me a view of what everyone is doing to work together. For us, when we talk about seniors, for us it's about making sure that we reduce your risk for fall and injury and ensure you have medical services while you're housed with us in the facilities. I will say that as far as the scam call and the spoof calls, we were receiving our office was inundated with a number of phone calls where a person was calling and saying that the person was locked up and calling senior and saying, "Granddaddy, grandmommy, I'm locked up and I need this money. And we've been filtering those calls to Chief Jones's office, and they seem to die down, except for when my father shared with me on Thanksgiving that he received one of those phone calls. And you know, he doesn't like to speak to anybody on the phone, so he hangs up on people. But the reality is that everyone isn't like my dad. And they're not going to, they're going to engage the person who's crying they're going to deep measures of actually crying and presenting this case. And so it's unfortunate that they're saying that they're stemming from our correctional agency, but they go in spurts, and it's very hard to be able to control it.
Thank you all very, very much. I've seen the presentations. I've worked with many of you on a variety of topics. You do a wonderful job, and we need to make certain, we say this all the time, we need to make certain that we're giving you the resources to take care of this problem, to help take care of this problem. And so I think we're all committed to doing that. So thank you very much. Again, thank you very much for being here. We're going to go on to our second topic, which is the Public Safety Employees Mental Health Support Services. And with that, Susan, if you would like to lead us through that one, please.
Sure, I'll just let everybody take a seat.
Okay.
Thank you. Do we have everybody? As you stated, the next item up is mental health support services that are provided to public safety employees. I tried to get some information from the various departments who would be affected for you as you work into the upcoming FY21 budget, in case there are any identified needs that you wanted to make sure were included in the budget or put on reconciliation lists, that type of thing. There are certain common themes among all the departments. They all either have a peer support team or a crisis intervention and support team of some sort. They all have access to the county's EAP program, which is Employee Assistance Program. They all have access to private insurance and therefore private providers as well. But different types of public safety employees face different types of needs. They have different challenges. They work 24/7. What a public safety communications specialist might encounter will be different than what a paramedic encounters, will be different than what a correctional officer encounters. All of the agencies here have provided an overview. I had asked for some encounter data. Obviously, that's very difficult to get because of privacy concerns. So it's harder to identify where the needs may be, and we'll have to rely on anecdotal information from the departments as far as, do they need more mental health service providers? Do they need them embedded with their workers? Do they need them separate over an OHS to provide another layer of privacy? There are ongoing concerns at every level. If somebody indicates that they do have mental health troubles and they want some sort of support, they're worried how it might affect their job. Will they be taken off of active duty for a certain period of time? Does it jeopardize their job permanently? So those are problems and concerns that employees have out there. The different agencies will speak to how they can help try to reduce the stigma surrounding this situation. And privacy concerns as well. I also just read this morning that there is a bill in at the federal level in Congress. It's a bipartisan bill in the Senate that will require the FBI to gather data on law enforcement suicides and attempted suicides by age and any known cause of that suicide as well. That's going to present some additional challenges, again, because of privacy concerns. And it's something, if it passes, something that the agencies will have to look to when that occurs. So if each of the departments could give an overview of what types of services they have for their employers, some anecdotal information on types of encounters, what are their employees saying they need right now at this point? And that could be peer support, it could be more licensed clinical social workers, that type of thing. And plans moving forward, what has been identified in each department that would help? What are the identified needs at this point?
Thank you. And to the point about the federal government getting statistics, the fact that they're getting statistics on someone that has committed suicide is way after they're closing the barn door after the horse is gone. I mean, we need to have statistics on how to prevent that as well. I mean, and with that, please, fire and rescue's up first.
So joining me at the table is, as you identified, Assistant Division Chief Charles Bailey and Battalion Chief Stacy Daniels. Stacy is our team leader for our Crisis Critical Incident Stress Management team. And your point about data, Mr. Katz, is line of duty deaths in the fire service have been surpassed by suicides in the fire service. That is a frightening fact when it is, I'm going to use the word estimated. That's a different phrase for speculated, but it's estimated that the reportable number of suicides in the fire service is only 40 to 50% of the actual events that are being reported. So the number is astonishing, and the circumstances that all of our teams bring to bear and to support our men and women is critical and paramount. So I dovetail to Charles.
You'll forgive me. After this, I got to run off to another one, so I'll be brief. First, I want to say thank you for addressing this issue. It's a sensitive issue, and it's important to the fire department specifically, but our approach to it really depends on having a cogent approach across the entire public safety spectrum. I'm only going to talk about this from the strategic level. Stacy, Chief Daniels, is the expert when it comes to the ground truth and how the programs actually get implemented. The truth is that whenever we send men and women out to do public safety work, they're going to be exposed to trauma, and they're going to be exposed to that over and over. They see things, they hear things, they touch things that are not normal in the course of everyday life. Without good mental health care, including preemptive training, having some notion of what to expect when they do touch the trauma, having some idea of how they're going to react both mentally, emotionally, and physiologically, the chances of them having debilitating disease, disorders, and problems downstream grows. We take a look at this from three perspectives. I consider it the moral imperative that says, as an organization, when we ask people to do this work, we're on the hook morally to support them from a mental health perspective, just like we are from a physical health perspective. No one bats an eye at supporting someone, a fireman with a broken ankle. We should not bat an eye at supporting a fireman with a mental health injury after he just saw something vicious. There's a productivity imperative. We hire people, we spend a lot of money training them. The happy employee, the emotionally fit employee, is a more productive employee, so it makes sense to do this work. And the last imperative is a fiscal imperative. When I lose a provider for an extended period of time for something that could have been prevented or at least mitigated, it comes at great cost. The fire department, the police department, 24/7 operation, that position has to be backfilled. From a strategic point of view, what do we want to do? We want to develop and deploy a diverse array of services and resources that ensure that getting help is simple. You shouldn't, when you need help, you shouldn't have to ask more than one or two questions. You should only be one or two mouse clicks away. That wherever you reach out, no matter if my fireman calls corrections because they're having a bad day and they dial the wrong phone number, they should know enough at corrections to point my guy in the right direction. So across the spectrum. We are working, thankfully, under the sheriff. I call him my sheriff, right? He's exclusive to me. But they just did a brilliant meeting the other day, and we talked about a lot of stuff. The collaboration amongst the organizations is growing, and we're working with OHR to figure out some ways to grow them some more. We want to reduce barriers to help. Someone mentioned the notion of separation. We're looking at ways to increase the separation between the employee who needs help in their chain of command. And again, the focus is on collaboration across the entire space, recognizing that each agency is different, but to the extent that we can share resources and ideas and build synergy, that would be great. My last point is about danger and risk. So I think we have to resist the urge to move full steam ahead, torpedoes tubes, full of water, with the ideas that just seem apparent and easy right now. This is a complex system, mental health, and it's nestled inside the complex systems of fire rescue, police, corrections. And what that means to me in this context is that there are some causal relationships that are just not obvious. And that means that there's going to be interactions between various parts of the systems that we can't predict. So I think that forces us to take a step back, be really measured in our responses, and to avoid what I think government gets to be so good at, is pouring a lot of money at it and ideas at a cost and creating these monolithic structures that are not as adaptive as they need to be. The problem we have in public safety mental health today necessarily is not the problem we're going to have in public safety mental health 2 years from now, and we simply can't afford to build a structure today that limits us in future development. Building adaptive systems takes time, it takes a lot of communication, it takes a lot of coordination, and but the future looks bright from my perspective. Thank you. Please. Did you have anything to?
Good morning. My name is Stacy Daniel. I'm Battalion Chief of Montgomery County Fire Rescue, and I've been the team leader for our crisis intervention team for almost 20 years now. We've developed an a program that's recognized nationally. We have a very, very strong program that has prevented suicides, that has increased our level of mental health awareness in the fire rescue service, and we've worked to eliminate the stigma. We start with a training program in the recruit class. We have 4 two-hour sessions with the recruits, and we talk to them the very first week they're in fire rescue. Don't do it to scare them. We do it to talk to them about normalizing the conversation around behavioral health and mental health and what they're going to see. This is not a normal job. You're not going to see normal things, and certain things will affect certain people. We tell them that throughout their career, something might affect you, and it's not a bad thing. You're still human. It's okay. We reinforce that all the way through recruit school. Then we continue this training program in the firehouses every 2 years. Every time we go out and do a training program in the firehouses to talk to the firefighters in a place that they're comfortable, because that's critical. It has to be in a place that they're comfortable and it's not being shoved down their throat. Our self-referral program to our staff psychologists skyrockets. Our last program, we had over 18 self-referrals in a 2.5-month program for extreme PTSD. Our biggest problem is our staff psychologist only has so much time, and he specializes in trauma, and that's where most of our work is done. We're very, very proud of our program. We have prevented suicides. We've taken guns out of firefighters' hands. We've kept them on the floor. We've kept them from retiring. A very vibrant, resource-rich mental health program is critical to maintaining these firefighters on the floor and keeping them involved in the fire service. We have great resources. We share. I work closely with with police. I work closely with the crisis center. I work closely with the Montgomery County Interfaith Group as well to bring resources to our firefighters, whether it be a work-related issue or a personal issue. You can't divide the two. Used to be back in the day, we'd say, well, leave your personal problems at the door before you come in the firehouse. You can't do that.
Right.
And so you never know if somebody sees something on a scene of a call, is that going to bring something to the surface that they're experiencing at home? So it is very complicated, and it is a very complex situation. But we're very, very proud of our program in Montgomery County Fire Rescue, and I've been given the support through Chief Goldstein and the previous chiefs to develop this program and to maintain it and keep moving it forward in the future.
Yeah, you touched on something. You said that you have helped prevent people from having to retire and staying in fire service. Do you want to touch on that a little bit more? If someone has an issue like this, they can come, I'm asking now, but they can come to professionals and the professionals will not terminate them from the job? Is that what you're saying?
No, sir. We've had many employees with complex PTSD work with our staff psychologist. And if they're not comfortable with our staff psychologist, we'll find them other resources. You know, finding a psychologist is like finding a pair of shoes. You got to try on a bunch of pairs to find the one that fits. But we've had many firefighters who have been paralyzed with PTSD. That's a girl thing, I guess.
That was very good. I used to be in the shoe business. That was
Right?
very, very good. Really,
Thank you.
believe me. Yeah.
Back to Sydney's own.
Right. So we've had many of our firefighters with complex PTSD who have approached our staff psychologists, and they've been paralyzed because of the PTSD. They can't put on their face piece. They can't go into a fire. They can't function in the field, and it's very difficult for them because of the PTSD, because of the physical response that they get when their PTSD is triggered. We work with them. We bring them back to a level of stability. We work with them with EMDR, cognitive therapy, just personal outreach, and we get them back into the field where they're now functioning firefighters. I could name many firefighters that I've worked with over my 20 years that were on the verge of retirement. We're on the verge of walking out the door and saying, I can't do this anymore. And we've gotten them back in the field, and they're very productive, and they've actually helped other firefighters sharing their stories.
Right.
Which has eliminated the stigma of when our firefighters. It was interesting that the lady was talking about the senior telling her own story. It's embarrassing to tell your own story, but when you do, you impact because it's a real story. We get these down and dirty firefighters that say, hey, I was there. This is real, and it's okay. The firefighters then respond to that, and they say, you know what, that might be me. And that's when one of the things that we find in our training program is we do awareness. And what I find is a lot of our firefighters, when we do our awareness training, the light bulb comes on, and they're like, man, you were talking about me. I didn't realize. Because depression in the fire service, and probably in police as well, is a slow burn. It's a very slow creep. It's not like, boom, a lot of our firefighters just, all of a sudden you're depressed. It's a slow creep. Things that you've seen over the years, things that you've dealt with over the years, and you've just sort of put it in a box, and that box gets very, very heavy, and it brings you down into this slow, just low level of depression. When we give them awareness and we tell them, hey, this is what you should look for, this is what you might feel like, this is what you will respond to, the light bulb comes on and they say, you're talking about me. And to have a person come up to us after we do our training in the firehouses and say, that's me, I need help. That's the most rewarding thing, and we can get them help and we can get them back into the field working as a functioning firefighter. We spend a lot of money on them to become firefighters. We don't want to lose them to something like mental health.
Very good. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. This is really, really important discussion on every conceivable level. You mentioned the capacity issue, as you would imagine. Within, is there a waiting list? Could you kind of unpack a little bit what that capacity issue might look like, and in addition to adding more psychologists, I mean, what other steps from a resource perspective would you recommend or you think would be helpful?
So as to the capacity, as our collective agencies have, in-house staff folks, there's definite capacity there. Charles articulated a little bit about this. The person who is going to be the critical intervention or involved here needs to be peer, needs to be understanding and aware to what men and women within public safety have interfaced with. There may be a pair of shoes available and a psychiatrist who's available to meet with you, but if you're more explaining to him or her what you do in your field, it is absolutely contrary to what you're going there for, is to be helpful. You're actually teaching him or her your world, and it's very counterproductive. So our staff folks are predominantly for that critical intervention and prepared, as Stacy outlined, the preparing and maintaining continuing education. The problem is, as with any healthcare professional today, I'll give you a referral, go see a professional healthcare provider, and you get told 2 months. Now, an officer, firefighter is off work for 2 months, not at full duty for that period of time. While our staff folks are able to give them that critical several visits to help them, but they are then waiting for further follow-on and additional capacity. So that is a symptom of healthcare, broadly. And one of the other unique natures, and specific into the law enforcement side, is scheduling and availability. Most of our folks are day work or 24/48, shift work. But those that are on midnights and those that are on, evening shift, and their ability to get an appointment or to get a time to be seen that may be close to their local residence, maybe somewhere geographically supportive of their home base, and then that timing factor gets to be so complicated, and that's something that is throughout the industry and a problem of ours.
And is this entirely covered by the county's health insurance plan? Does our plan cover when a firefighter or an officer or a corrections officer needs to come forward? Is our plan all-encompassing enough to address the needs within, or do they have to go out of the system in order to secure additional help? Are we seeing that?
Definitely a challenging point to answer that. So through the healthcare coverage, the capabilities are predominantly there. Through the workers' comp coverage, it is an extraordinarily different answer. The application of call number 1 on December the 2nd at 11 a.m. created this problem is not a covered expense, not a covered injury, because they're analyzing, as Charles said, an ankle injury to what is a pent-up long-term medical situation. So there is an extraordinary challenge on the workers' comp perspective of classifying the mental injury, the mental health situation, to being work-related. Downstream, after an extraordinary amount of effort, it predominantly gets recovered. It predominantly gets supported. But that is after another phase of stress onto the member and the member's family, by very much extension, that is a non-covered, workers' comp expense until a different part of that challenge process. So county health insurance, yes. When it's work-related, seeing a call, pediatric incident, or some other significant incident trauma, calling that a work-related workers' comp is a no.
And that was going to be my last point for now is on the extended family, because this is obviously, it's a unique challenge and trauma on the families on every conceivable level. And somebody said once, you're only happy as your least happy child. And you sort of bring that with you to work. And when you're dealing with life and death situations where you have to make split decisions. So I think I got my answer, but it sounds like we don't have comprehensive coverage to extend beyond the first responders to expand to their families.
Our staff psychologists will work with families if needed for an immediate acute event. And then the health coverage, we'll work with them. We do have a fairly robust mental health coverage, but finding somebody who is in the public safety realm, who understands public safety, is critical. And that's not really necessarily a job for council, but it's a wider question. I can't just send firefighter Joe to the guy down the street, because that guy down the street might manage something that has nothing to do with health, public safety. And when you start describing things that you've seen in your job, it then becomes traumatic for the health provider. And then the health provider is of no value, because I've experienced that firsthand. I made a psychologist cry once, just because of the nature of the things that we see. And it's very unfortunate. We do have outreach during Family Day at Recruit School and talk about behavioral health and mental health and awareness to say, hey, your firefighter might come home looking like this. To just give them a bit of a support and say, you can reach out as well. If you see your firefighter acting like this, retreating, isolating, things of that nature, you can call us. You can call the peer team. Well, I have 41 very active peers on my team and a hotline that they can call. Families can call it, and we welcome them.
And Mr. Abernaz, I did not want to leave the message that my family members, my spouse, or our spouses and loved ones are not covered through the mental health through county insurance. That's very much not the case.
Good.
Through the county insurance process, behavioral health is very well supported.
Good.
It's just the workers' compensation coverage of a traumatic event and how that is not like a physical injury to your finger, to your ankle, to your back, to anything of that nature, becomes a challenge that gets that coverage or that incident covered through workers' comp, as it would be if it was broke a bone.
Great, thank you.
This is very helpful, thank you. Just wondering, are any of these services available to volunteers?
Yes, sir. Sorry. Yes, sir.
Which are?
My peer team, all of our resources are available to volunteers.
But not the insurance, right?
Not
right.
the insurance.
But the
no,
peer
Our
sharing,
peer teams, we have
warning
volunteer
signs,
peers.
all that.
So I have 41 peers.
Uh-huh.
I think I have 5 or 6 volunteers at this point, and I've got 2 that are waiting to get accepted onto the team.
Right, great.
So we have a mixed bag. I've always said my peers, there's no rank or position. We're all there to support each other. And they're also allowed to see our staff psychologist and our staff social worker.
They are, great.
Yes,
okay,
sir.
good. I was hoping you'd say that. Thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. We're going to hear from corrections, please.
Supervisor therapist, who is also our lead for our CISM, Critical Incident Stress Management Team, Lori Monbay, is joining me at the table. And I'll be brief, and I agree with a lot that was said previously by our colleagues. 85% of DOCR staff could respond to a critical incident when we talk about our custody and security, resident supervisors, nurses, therapists. And so in dealing with critical incidents and also the normal day of a 24-hour, 24/7 correctional environment, the stressors that you deal with in that, we very much support the mental health support and education and services for our employees for a lot of the reasons that were already previously stated. We have, our employees, of course, have access to the Employee Assistance Program. We recognize that that was not enough for us in 2015, and we formed our own critical incident stress management team that is led by Ms. Monbay. And we've had much success with that. It unfortunately, though, is a team that has absorbed these responsibilities in addition to their regular responsibilities, and that is something that is lacking for us, that we don't have a dedicated staff member who is performing these services. And so we applaud our 10 trained staff members who want to support their colleagues in times of stressors on and off the job, but it is something that they're doing as a volunteer effort out, or sometimes paid, but they're doing it for the peer support, and they're doing it in addition to their own work. Our CISM team, when formed in 2015, has responded to more than 30 critical incidents, which include some inmate deaths, suicide attempts, assaults on staff, and employee deaths. They have engaged 500 employees through interventions on and off the job related issues, and so they are effective. They're trustworthy. They have built that credibility among their peers that they're going to maintain confidentiality. Through our training and outreach during the past 4 years, we have reached probably more than 2,000 employee contacts. And Ms. Bombay can go into anything that I miss. But we have, I am very proud of what they have formed through their, to trying to eliminate barriers, to eliminate the stigma. We have done so many engagements through the county's Live Well, who has been a great partner to us, coming on site, because you got to come to where we are. It isn't real easy for us to get out when you talk about some of the scheduling, and we talk about people having to work 24/7. Our employees, especially our officers, they never leave their post for 8.5 hours a day. They are paid a working lunch because they may need to respond. So they aren't getting a break to get away and go outside. And so when you couple this with the family life, which we've already talked about, the stressors of going home, we have to make things as easy as for people as possible. When we're talking about the EAP process, it's great. I would hope that we can expand that to meet the new generation of needs and things being online. You know, we are a very social media type of society now, and how are we meeting, making things as easy as possible for people to reach the services. I agree with what was stated previously, that you have to ensure that people understand the environment who are providing the services, and that's what makes Ms. Bombay and her team very successful, is that they understand when someone speaks about some of the stressors that are going on the job, that they work in this public safety environment and they understand it, and so they don't have to go back and tell you what you do step by step and why this is causing you stress on your job or what this meant. And so that is very key to any type of services that we will want to provide for our department. Some of the things that they also do is they attend roll call trainings with our on the floor custody and security staff. We do that. We have included suicide prevention in our yearly training to our staff members, and we're always looking to include more topics. And some of the things that we have to improve on is getting the subject matter experts inside, because we don't have, like I said, a separate funding source or resources to be able to say, this is your job, and you're 24 hours dedicated to it. You want to speak to some of the feedback that you get from officers who are using the program?
Yeah, we've had great, actually more success than I thought we would. Corrections is a skeptical bunch of folks, and I was pleased with how people responded when we started the team, and that they will reach out to people in the team. It's a challenging environment to deliver services in, like all public safety environments. We also, I just wanted to speak a moment to, I felt like it was really important when we started the program, even though it's critical incident stress, that we're not just responding to traumatic events, of which there are many, but that we start talking to people when they walk in the door. So I go to orientation. I developed a course specifically designed to speak to stress management for corrections. And again, my partners in the Live Well program have been amazing in coming in to help deliver some of that information. I think one of our challenges is also working with that family piece, helping family members understand what it's like for their loved one to be working in a correctional environment.
And some of that, and you started addressing families. We offer family tours as well once a year, and you've been addressing families, and being able to give families a an idea and observe the actual working environment of their loved ones was something that we felt was important to do, and also being able to speak about some of the stressors during that time when we have families engaged is something for us that we want to continue to do. And so we're moving forward on and looking at how we increase her team, quite frankly, how we continue to use Live Well and trying to reach staff in different platforms. Every staff member doesn't have access to internet, and so in 2016, the department had intranet services, which is available for everyone who's working the post. But we also have to find, like I said, different platforms to reach employees who want the easier way of being able to be connected and want to be able to do things on a quick basis. Because when people are getting off on shifts and they're going home, they're not thinking, I'm going to stop and see someone, quite frankly. I mean, if you're talking about things that you got going on at home, that's just not what you're doing, especially if you're driving significant travel distance and you're working two shifts back to back. And so we still have to find ways to be able to do that. We still need to be able to find a way to be able to get people to have a trusting environment. We have posters, we have newsletters, we have made mental health support for our employees a priority for us, and we want people to see it as every day that, hey, you may need support at a different time. Doesn't mean you can't do your job, but you may need support. And we need to be able to increase our efforts and able to engage staff.
Any questions? No. Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks.
for doing. And next, we're going to hear from the police, please.
Yeah, I got it. Okay. Good morning. So, as noted with fire rescue, when we look at the number of suicides in policing, this is an epidemic. We are seeing, again, the number of officers who died last year were 167 verified suicides in the country, larger than the number of officers who were killed feloniously, which is 55, or accidentally, which was 51. And that's those two numbers combined still don't measure up to the number of the officers who committed suicide, again, that were verified. So clearly we know that there is a problem throughout this country. And again, it's reached what we have deemed in law enforcement to be an epidemic level. We are different than what was been previously described via fire rescue. We have a police psychologist who is, which was separated from the Office of Stress Management, which used to be a part of the police department, was moved to the Office of Human Resources, so that it created the disconnect between sort of that sort of kind of help with that stigma that the officer would generally have to go through the police department to be connected to the Office of Stress Management. Now the officers and staff members have the ability to go directly to the Office of Stress Management, which is under OHR, and never be, we as the police and the executives or supervisors may never know that individual went and had a consultation or is being seen by the police psychologist. And when I say we have, currently there are 2 police psychologists that are on staff at OHR, which means they are specifically trained to deal with police officers and police staff members for our department. Now, that's the good, in a sense, that's the good news. But the bad news prior to that was we only had 1 police psychologist up to just recently, and I do mean recently, within the past couple of months. And here we had Dr. Oliver Stone, who has been with us for, I think, approximately about 4+ years. Dr. Stone noted, he did a presentation for us just recently with the Criminal Justice Commission, and he noted in response that he's seen probably someone in the range of around 800+ clients over the past year. Now, and again, somewhat different than fire rescue. Our family members are offered the services, the same services that our police officers get, the immediate family. So if there's an issue with the immediate family who may be not only themselves going through something, or that they're noticing also that their loved one who is in law enforcement is going through something, they can also be seen by Dr. Stone or by our police psychologist staff. Dr. Stone made a very interesting point when he noted that an officer going through the course of their career, and generally again a 25-year career here, is going to see or be exposed to approximately 188 critical incidents during the course of that lifetime. And that's an incredible amount of number when you look at when we were responding to a variety of different types of events, traumatic events that occur here in the county, whether it be an infant death, whether it may be a fatal collision, it may be a homicide. There are numerous types of incidents that have occurred that we know historically that officers sometimes get exposed to. And again, what are we doing with those particular incidents when those critical incidents are occurring? We do have our peer support team. We have a large peer support team that gets trained. In fact, they just went through an annual training just recently. All volunteers, individuals that are wholly committed to helping their fellow officers and fellow police employees in dealing with these types of traumatic incidents, and who put forth the extensive amounts of time of their own time and energy to assist with those families during these types of incidents. As noted, there's three really ways of our folks being exposed to these types of services within the county. One is self-referral, one is a supervisory referral, and the third, of course, is sometimes mandated via our policy. We do have cases where we do mandate individuals to have to go to see the police psychologist in order, based upon the incident that had occurred. Also, I think, which is vitally, is just from a knowledge base, is that, and which is news to me, but Dr. Stone shared with us that female officers have a higher number of suicidal thoughts in this profession, and of course, the police, we ourselves, are 54% higher in suicides than our than any other American worker in general. So that's a staggering number when you look at the stresses of the job, when you look at promotion, when you look at females who are raising families with shift work, with a lot of other dynamics that are connected to this profession. It's something that we've got to really pay attention to and provide, give those resources, make sure those resources are made readily available to them. Again, we do, our officers also can participate in the employee assistance program. I think the one thing we do know with that particular program is that we have a lack of providers who are culturally competent, as fire rescue noted, in response to and corrections as a notice to the job itself. So when you're actually calling that number with our EAP, is that you may not necessarily have someone who is very knowledgeable on the other line. Another thing that I think that's of issue when we look at the number of police psychologists that we do have on staff, which I think, again, we're unique in our own ways. There's a lot of other police departments across this country who may be smaller, who don't have those types of resources, and that's a major problem. But even with a department of our size, when you think about it, for a department with 2,000 employees, because it's more than just the police officers themselves, which are vitally important here in every regard. But with 2,000 employees, there's a need for additional, psychologists and sort of outsourcing, you might say. And how do we best provide for our folks who may not necessarily live in the county, as an example, who may live outside of the county, but who really want to see and get some help, but may not want to drive, for example, to Rockville in order to obtain those services. How can we better give them the resources that they need in a way that's much more convenient and helpful to them and their families? I think that's something that's vitally important. One of the things I will say, I think that we have some other programs such as the chaplaincy program. I think that's important when we still talk about these types of things that are going on in our stressors, and it's not clearly defined, but I think that there's folks that are willing to help our officers out and provide them with if some of our officers will do that on their own and reach out to those types of to those folks who are connected with the police department. But I think that one of the things I've talked to Dr. Stone about recently was really trying to be, how can we be more proactive on a preventive end? As Councilman Katz noted about, we don't want to wait until we're in the storm or the storm has passed and now we see what has happened as a result of the tragedy that has occurred. And so one of the things I want to do is I want to be able to come up with an advertising campaign, you might say, of providing posters and information pamphlets to our officers and staff members by posting the resources that are available to them in all of our police facilities, so that therefore that it's sometimes that they might be going through things that they may not be sharing, because again we know about the stigma, we've talked about that, but that they see it for themselves. They may think, okay, I can do this without having to really expose this out to anybody, and I can pick up the phone or I can reach out to somebody online, whichever way that they wish to communicate or that service is provided, and to provide them with the access numbers for them to do the outreach and to get the help that they need. And it is a preventative measure. It's not so much waiting until really until the tragedy has occurred. So I think those are things that we really have to come and do some brainstorming with. We are working with the FOP, establishing a joint wellness committee. As we know, some of these things are issues that have to be bargained with our police officers, and some of the things also possibly with McGeo. But we want to make sure that we have folks that are getting those services in the needs when they need them. And we will note also that Dr. Stone does come to our police academy at the beginning of the recruit class when we have family day, when the families are brought before our recruits, and he speaks to them specifically about these resources that are available to them to make sure that they are knowledgeable, that they know that those resources are available in those times of need. So.
Very good. Any questions?
Yep. So thank you, Chief Jones. I'll pick up where you just left off. So it sounded like within fire and rescue, the culture of peer support system and as they said, among the most effective ways to sort of address this holistically. And it's good to hear that service is provided as early as possible within the Police Training Academy, not just to the officers themselves, but their families, which I think is very relevant and important. But are there ongoing, beyond the posters, which I think is important from information sharing, but is there training going on among managers, for example, or is there other training within peers that is going on, that signs that should be noticed, and what is the rate, if you happen to know, of the referrals? How much of them are self-reported versus how much are mandated versus how much are coming from supervisors? Any breakdown there would be helpful.
I don't have any numbers on that. I think it probably would be best that Dr. Stone probably would be able to break that down much more. For example, I wouldn't know of any self-reporting employee that would go directly to that office due to the fact of why we separated that out. We would probably, there may be, and I don't even get when I don't receive, as far as the chief, I don't receive the information where in all cases where we have our some of our supervisory staff that might be, doing a referral. In some cases I do, and in some cases I don't, depending upon the level of sort of the stress that that particular employee might be gathering. And so that's generally is between the Office of Stress Management and that particular supervisor. I mean, we talk about this a lot in our supervisory leaderships circles and executive staff about some of the signs. We've done training on this. We can always continue to do more as it relates to, we've had cases where, again, unfortunately, where I think sometimes an employee might share more with another peer than they do a lot of times with the supervisor. And when we, one of the things I think best practices that the Police Executive Research Forum has talked about is really about police departments being able to learn from, unfortunately, the catastrophic events that have occurred, and when you go back and you really kind of dig a little deeper to figure out what did we miss, how could we have better, figured out that there were some signs there that stated that we needed to do something well in advance of if at all possible. In some cases, I don't know if there are signs that the supervisory staff may have, and in some cases there are. I think that would note that a change in behavior, work performance and things of that nature as it relates to stress and depression, as time has gone on with our employees. So very complicated situations, but I think it's something that we really have to pay a lot closer attention to.
I do think, Mr. Chairman, as a follow-up, this obviously would go under the GO committee since our psychologists fall within the Office of Human Resources, but I think they'd be in a better position to answer some of the questions I have, because it feels like, trust is so important in this space, and this is such a delicate, as you said correctly, complex issue. But the level of communication back and forth is so critical, because if, fortunately, somebody has self-reported that they are feeling the burden and stress of this position, but if the supervisor, understandably for legitimate reasons, in some cases those officers may not want their supervisors to know that information. But in some cases they're going to need to know some level of information so that they don't unintentionally put them in harm's way when they're not in a position to be able to fully address an issue. And I just wonder, it makes a lot of sense to me, particularly from the stigma perspective, to have that additional buffer. But I worry that it could unintentionally create other challenges. And so I think now having two psychologists is great news. But I'd love to hear more from them regarding what their capacities are, and then in those instances in which they have identified that there is an issue, how is that communication working? Is it working the way that it should be? Because it's important to the officer, it's important to our community. And I'll speak generally right now that there are important questions happening at the national level regarding policing, which has produced a lot of very charged and challenging rhetoric on the national level. And I've heard directly from officers who are on the front lines that this is impacting them as well. And not unlike the way that we have generationally started to appreciate the work of our military personnel. You go to a ball game now, and at every single one of them, and this is such a beautiful thing, there's time taken to acknowledge their service to our country.
Yep.
And that has value beyond just acknowledging the work of those individuals that happen to be in that stadium. It helps uplift the entire profession. And I do think there's a responsibility, while we have those important questions and dialogue at the national level, to address systemic issues that have been going on for generations, that we not lose sight of ensuring that we recognize the sacrifices and the incredible work of all of our first responders. And so I'm going to leave that alone for now, just generally. But I do think it's related to this issue and is compounding what is already very challenging work, to say the least.
If I could address that, I think that this is a vital part of our officers' mental well-being. At this point in time, when you come to work every day, you put this uniform on, and the sacrifices that the officers make when they do that. But then to have to constantly be bombarded, you might say, in many avenues across social media, in our media outlets across this country, where there's always a sense of negativity, and then you're going and you're responding to calls for service, and people are responding in a very negative way. This is happening daily, and it doesn't get talked about a lot. But I will tell you, all of this negative stuff that goes on does have a negative impact on an officer's well-being. I'm hearing it daily, more so than I've ever heard it over the course of my 34-year career. And I've seen us go through these peaks and valleys, right? I've seen us go through incidents that seem to, that, for example, the Rodney King incident in 1991, I remember that wholeheartedly. But, there was a time when we sort of kind of worked our way through that, and police departments, learned, and police officers got better over time, even from a mental standpoint. But I'll tell you, recently, it's just been constant. And so, we have officers who are hurting right now and struggling in reality to go out here and do their jobs because they feel like they're being, like they're being watched every minute, every move that they make, that somebody's got something negative to say about what they're doing. And I don't know what other profession out there that has to deal with that. I really don't, from that perspective. And so I would state to that it does address, to me, it gives grave concern from a morale standpoint, but it also goes to people's individual well-being about a sense of worth. Because people come into this job because they have a dedication to public service, and they do that. And okay, we are human and people will make mistakes, but the reality is when you paint this broad brush, it gives a very negative complex to folks into their well-being. So I think that's a point that's well taken that needs to be a part of this discussion.
And to your point about the government operations, I think it should be a joint committee hearing or discussion committee meeting. And to your point, Chief, when something happens in Chicago, all of a sudden everybody's blamed every place in America for what happened in Chicago, and so that's a hard thing for anybody to have to deal with. Do you have any other questions?
I think they can wait for the joint committee.
Okay. Please, we're now going to hear from the Park Police.
Okay. Well, I will, in the interest of time, probably not go into much detail about some of the things that Chief Jones talked about. I certainly agree with him in so many different aspects. A couple things that we have currently within our system, of course, peer support. I have with me the peer support coordinator for the Park Police. She has been from the very inception and literally wrote the policy for us, Lieutenant Sarah Michael-Laskas, who also serves as my executive aide, and she's one of 4 that we have, 2 of which have actually a master's degree in forensic psychology. She's one of those smart persons. And but another is a dispatcher, which we recently added to that group, which we're happy about because we want our non-sworn members to feel just as comfortable coming forward as the sworn members. On average, she averages, or the team itself averages, about 2.5 contacts per month, to give an idea of at least the internal usage, if you will. I'm glad to hear that there is additional usage. Anecdotally, she can speak to you about how comfortable people feel coming to her. We do have access to the county's Office of Stress Management, in particular Dr. Oliver Stone, as part of the peer support group. We're pleased about that because he is certified in police trauma, if you will. As my colleague kind of spoke about that before, that's not something that every provider provides within the community itself, so we're happy about that. And they also, of course, participate in monthly trainings and details. The commission itself does have an EAP. Seems to be fairly robust. A good number of free in-person services. but also expands to other just general work-related issues and or family issues that people may be dealing with. And as the Chief before mentioned about that slow burn, if you will, I would agree with her. It's not always the acute big issue, so to speak. It's an accumulation of things that occur over time that some people just simply want assistance for. One of the things that Chief Jones mentioned was very often in this line of work, we sometimes ask ourselves, what did we miss? And it takes me back literally 25 years ago when I was a young sergeant, and I had a tremendous individual on my particular shift. Matter of fact, I was taking his performance evaluation up to my captain at the time. Very proud of it because I spent a lot of time in it. He's an outstanding officer, had nothing but good to say about him. And then my captain said, hey, I need you to sit down. That officer in question was on a temporary assignment somewhere else within the agency when I was still with MCP. And unfortunately, due to an acute issue that was more family related, he took his own life. And I never forgot that situation. I remember, of course, speaking at his funeral and other things as well. But we asked ourselves, what do we miss? You know, and people who may have seen him maybe a day prior in court or whatever it may have been says, hey, we didn't notice anything differently. But one of the things I think is much different 25 years ago compared to now is the number of services that are provided, internally and externally. So for that, I'm grateful, and I certainly commend you all for taking the time to do this because it is indeed just that important. A couple things internally that we're doing to increase our capacity, of course, is we want to make sure that our internal policies also represent our commitment. We've taken time to look at some of the policies we currently have, and of course, like any other directives, they get written and then all of a sudden you forget about them for 10 years or so. So it's important to look at them and say, hey, what would we need to change in here that represents 2019 going into 2020? Whether it's peer support issues, often involve deaths, administrative suspensions, and those types of issues, military deployments, and or reassignments back to the shifts in the groups. So we're re-looking at our directives themselves. Crisis intervention training, very often we've looked at that from a standpoint of those with tasers to go out and deal with the public, but it's very important that every officer, quite frankly, have that training, if you will. So we've made it mandatory. Only 20% of our officers have had that training. We will be making that 100% over the next 2 years as we'll get additional ones trained through the process with other entities. Mental health first aid, all of our employees have had that training. One of the things we are focusing on is when the officers immediately are onboarded, if you will, that we involve the family members as well at that particular orientation and talk about the services that are available to them and the families, the officers themselves. To reduce the level of stigma, if you will, that this is some type of abnormal issue that nobody else deals with, we are making it a point in our annual in-service to almost have a block where we just simply talk about general employee wellness, whether it's physical fitness, whether it's nutrition, mental health, post-traumatic stress disorder, and those types of things so that they understand, hey, you know what, just like we understand certain signs or symptoms of getting a cold, if you will, you address it early when it's just a cough as opposed to waiting until later it's pneumonia, so to speak. So we want to make sure that they realize that that's something they shouldn't be ashamed of. And also, of course, what the jails see on a regular basis, coexisting disorders. Sometimes opioid addictions can be really a symptom of maybe what they're going through mentally as far as a stressor, if you will. So if we can find, instead of isolating these issues, but really look at them holistically as a group, then perhaps we can prevent something before it becomes tragic at a later time. And then also looking at our confidentiality protocols, agree that there's certainly areas where you have to have some type of level of balance, if you will, not only for the officer's sake, but of course agency as well, but also the community as well. So we want to sure to work with, of course, our bargaining representatives and others to make sure that what we do is in the best interest of all parties, and of course that the appropriate persons get the help that they need. So I will stop there unless you all have some more questions, but it's certainly breaking the stigma and encouraging help. I think it was Angela had mentioned making sure it's easy, 24/7 access. I think it's the University of Maryland has a current campaign where they talk about 30 days too late. In other words, if you need the help, you can't wait 30 days in every situation, but let's make sure it's available much, much quicker. And of course, removing the stigma whereby anyone who goes through a traumatic incident, whether they're a witness to it or not, that it's automatic that they get the assistance that they need, so that we remove this, hey, that person must be weak if they're going to get assistance. No, it's made mandatory for everybody in the interest of erring on the side of caution, if you will.
Thank you. Any questions? If not, we're going to go to the sheriff. Sheriff, please.
Okay, thank you. As you all know, there was nothing more important than the health and safety of our employees, so thank you very much for having this important hearing this morning. Just about a week or so ago, as chair of the Criminal Justice Commission, I had Dr. Stone actually come out and do a presentation. As always, Ms. Farag put together a great packet, and for those of you who could not come to it, she's included his slides in the packet, in his presentation, his slides. But it's out of context unless you actually hear it from him. So at some point, although it's taken him away from the ability to do some of his actual counseling, which is what is so critically important, I would strongly suggest that you do have that joint committee meeting and have him come in, because his presentation at the Criminal Justice Commission really was eye-opening.
And I had never met him before. Obviously, I was at that presentation. Very impressive. I mean, really.
And it really was. It answered Councilman Arvana's a lot of your questions. Councilman Hucker, yours as well. He really hit on a number of things that, even us, as many of us who were sitting around this table, we weren't sure of, because he had those numbers that we don't have. And it was truly eye-opening and very, very important. And in some regards, from Montgomery County's perspective, we are very fortunate. We have a national expert here right in our backyard that can answer those questions and are providing the counseling or whatever else is needed certainly for the Montgomery County Police Department. As you've heard from almost every agency head in here, the peer-to-peer conversation, most agencies might call it different, but the peer support teams are probably the most important area where we are all kind of focusing a lot of our attention on. Our employees are much more likely to speak to a peer, and that's before they ever get to the professional counselor level. So the peer-to-peer is very, very important. My deputies, we have a very robust peer support team that is integrated with Montgomery County Police. It falls under Dr. Stone. He provides monthly training to them at their meetings monthly, which is incredibly important because this is, as Charles was mentioning later, this is really an ongoing science that is changing. And we can't take what we knew from a while ago and say that's the way it's applying now, because there's other factors that are kind of weighing on some of these reasons for this. Several years ago, before Dr. Stone had come on, Dr. Hayes started this program, and she was as good as he was as well. Right when Dr. Stone came on, and there was 2 psychologists, I had asked whether or not the sheriff's deputies could then be included as part of the Office of Stress Management, that even though I have 200 employees, the number of people that would actually seek would be, although I don't have really data because of the confidentiality, would be a very small subset. Because of the feedback that I do get back is that the Employee Assistance Program, although is available and people can go, the counselors or psychologists or psychiatrists, whatever is at that level at the EAP, they are just not specializing in public safety. And so, as Chief Goldstein has mentioned, if you're spending part of your counseling sessions explaining to the professional of what you do, it defeats some of why you're there. So, although I'm grateful to the fact that the county has the EAP program, after Dr. Stone's presentation last week, clearly over the course of the last several years, when he's only been, one psychologist for 2,000 employees, there was no possibility of adding any more people because he's at, was it 875, I think, Marcus? 875 actual consultations in the last year, which is an extraordinary number based on the time considerations for that. So there was not even an opportunity even to have that discussion. Now, just a couple weeks ago, there was a second psychologist brought on. I know he has a lengthy learning curve as well. And I know this isn't something that can happen immediately, but I'm hoping in someday in the future that again that we can, because of some on the EAP side not having that experience in public safety, that somehow the sheriff's deputies and the small subset of people that would be a part of it could then be steered back to the local police psychologist, the Office of Stress Management, because it just makes sense to me to have that all in a similar program that's been offered throughout the county. So, and again, thank you very much for
thank you for any questions. Now we're going to wait till the joint hearing. Thank you all for everything you're doing. We're going to continue to work on this. This is obviously something that everyone is extremely concerned about. Obviously, the statistics alone prove that we need to be concerned about it, and we will. The next and the final discussion that we're going to have this morning is the crime statistics, and the acting assistant chief has told me that this is going to take 15 minutes. So we're going to see if we can, he's going to do one of those auctioneer type of discussions, but otherwise we're going to have to reschedule, and we're going to try to get this in today. So, Assistant Chief, if you could please begin your conversation.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. Dinesh Patil, Acting Assistant Chief of Police for the Management Services Bureau, and I appreciate the opportunity this morning to talk to you about crime statistics in Montgomery County and kind of take a look at where we are and how it compares to some other jurisdictions. So a big part of what I want to hopefully accomplish today is provide some context about crime stats and data, because it's not as simple, like many statistics, just looking at what's in front of you. To begin with, the way that we collect data is through our records management system and our report writing system, commonly referred to as an RMS. And our RMS literally was developed in the 90s. It's that kind of level of a product. So it lacks a certain sophistication. It lacks easy or end user ability to interface with it. So oftentimes when you have a product that isn't easy to use, you then get limited participation or activity from the end user. So our officers do what's required of them, and they do a good job, but being hampered by a tool that kind of holds them back, I know we're not getting as rich of data as we could be getting. I also wanted to kind of just give you a background, if you're not aware, the difference between the Uniform Crime Reporting System as it relates to summary reporting, which is what everybody kind of used to do, and summary reporting really was looking at your highest offense. If you had 5 kind of crimes that took place, you would look at your highest one. Your report would be written, let's say, as a robbery, but you also might have had an auto theft, an arson, or other things underneath it, but you wouldn't really capture those statistically. You always went with the higher one. The nation has been transitioning to what's called NIBRS, the National Incident-Based Reporting System. It's supposed to be mandated that by 2021 the entire nation will be on it, but it requires that agencies get better, newer technology. So NIBRS looks at every incident or every crime that's taken place within a particular event. So you have a much richer picture, an analysis of the data. You can get kind of behind the scenes a little bit, and then the idea being that data will drive your staffing, that data will drive your deployment and where you put people, how you put what your schedules are. How do you attack a crime problem if you don't know the full picture? Montgomery County has always kind of been on the leading edge. The police department adopted and became fully NIBRS compliant in 2017. But I bring it up today because some of the data that you're going to see of the agencies that were requested to compare in this presentation today, not all of them are on NIBRS yet. The state of Maryland has not made that move completely. And rightfully so. Everybody wants to make sure they're doing it right. It's a very different way of capturing data, reporting, and following a different set of rules. So that's a bit of the just background on NIBRS and what we call summary reporting. The other thing to remember, because we are in a very transparent, open format of how we share our data. So our data, we look at live internally in what we call our own dashboard system, and we take data out of our e-justice records management system, and we look at it almost basically on a daily basis, and certainly on a weekly basis. But that can change. The numbers can change, and the type of an event can change based on investigation and quality assurance. So a report may be written as, let's say, a robbery, but when further analysis is done or further investigation is done, it might have only been a theft. And so those numbers can change, and I think sometimes the community and different people can look at it and say, wait, why isn't this number consistent? And that's a struggle for us across the board, is trying to find consistent numbers, or at least make people understand, because that same data, at least or filtered in a different way, gets produced on Data Montgomery. So I just say that from a context standpoint, like you may look at something one day and it may look a little different the next day, and I would always just say to everybody, hey, ask us the question of why, and we're happy to kind of explain how it gets from one place to another, because everything you'll see today or in the comparison when you get a chance to read it is based on annual reports that those agencies produced. It was static data, they closed out their previous years, and so that data for the most part is done. You may get some variances again if an investigation, a year or two later says, oh, that actually was something different. But for the most part, annual reports show that static data, where our live data is kind of always in flux. I think another thing to consider.
I did want to add that when you're saying the difference between robbery and a theft, the robbery involves force.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So,
right. The force or a threat of force. And sometimes it's getting behind the scene there a little bit to see what actually happened. Also, I would just.
Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
I know we're trying to rush through, but a couple of thoughts. Does the software exist now that could upgrade the software we've had? From
Yes, I'm sorry, and it was in my notes, and I kind of blew past it. We were in the middle of a evaluation and RFP process to acquire a new records management system, basically for all law enforcement within Montgomery County.
Great.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for reminding me. So another thing to keep in mind as you look at statistics is when you look at population and where certain, say, counties or jurisdictions are, you look at some of the data in this packet, and you'll see that Baltimore has numbers, where they border Baltimore City and a much broader border than where we border Washington, D.C. is going to have an effect on things. You look at the population, Frederick County has about a quarter of the population we do, so it's hard to draw an apples-to-apples comparison. Also, in particular, Frederick County and Prince George's County, their county statistics don't show their municipalities within. For Montgomery County, we capture Gaithersburg City and Rockville City. Tacoma Park does their own accounting. So, again, just the context behind all the numbers so you just understand what you're looking at. Another big change that I wanted to bring to your awareness is that one of the things that you'll see across all the counties that were analyzed is that rape offenses have increased, and in many, many cases dramatically. Some of that we believe is because of greater awareness, that people are coming forward. I think the national attention has been useful in that effort. But part of what we used to do, especially when we did summary reporting, but even as we started getting into NIBRs, we thought it was important at the time to report rape cases, the statistics on them based on when the event was reported to us. Well, right now, in year to date, we're running about 31% of cases reported in 2019 happened before 2019. Some of that reaching all the way back to 1976. Wow. So in an effort to be compliant with NIBRs and to have, again, more consistency, with Chief Jones, we had a discussion. We're now reporting when the statistic based on when the event actually occurred. So going forward, if it's reported in 2019 but it happened 5 years ago, the case will absolutely still get investigated and still get all the attention it should deserve. But we're going to be reporting in a NIBRs compliant way, which will be the date of the incident and not date of the report. So those numbers should equalize over a period of time. Just quick highlights for year two. There it is. Year to date, when you look at let me back up a little. When you look at 2018, one of the anomalies you might see is that we had higher than and a little bit higher than maybe normal in homicides. We had the Brookville incident, unfortunately, where multiple people were killed during that one incident. When you look at in 2019, we had two of our cases were officer-involved shootings, where unfortunately we had to take a life of two different felons involved in different cases: the bank robbery in Silver Spring and then the gun store in Rockville. We talked about the rape statistics and those changes. You know, generally speaking, you know, I think you know, we do very well, you know, as it relates to other jurisdictions. I think you have to look at each crime category. I think, you know, when you look at our robbery numbers compared to Fairfax County, I think Fairfax is probably one of the most comparable to us. When you look at population, they have about, you know, 400 square miles or so, you know, 8 police districts. Their sworn capacity is about 100 more officers than we have. But generally speaking, I think you see a fair amount of consistency across the board between those agencies, except when you look at like robbery numbers in particular. And, you know, I think you have to look at, okay, this is where you get deeper into the data work. You know, where are your bad guys coming from, you know, that are doing a crime? You know, I know that Chief LaCourty, when he was the commander down Tootie, had really done kind of a little expose on how much they were being hit by young people coming out of Washington, D.C. in the middle of the night and, you know, stealing from cars or stealing cars. So when you look at those numbers, again, I think you have to now dive deeper into the facts of, you know, where your offenders are coming from and what crimes are occurring. One of the things that came up related, you know, a question when you look at the numbers. Yes, sir.
Chief, just to interrupt for a second, this doesn't reflect how many people are actually caught.
Correct.
Do we get into that at all, or?
Not in this presentation. One of the struggles that we have, and we're working with the Department of Corrections to get a better sense of that, is to connect our data set from their booking system either into our records management system or into a separate dashboard where we can do a deeper analysis of that. Okay. We had a connection, but we're working on reestablishing that.
Okay.
And just a little bit of background. One of the things that comes up often when you look, especially look at the number of rape offenses, is you know, how many of those are related to people that were known or unknown, and you see kind of end up in 3 categories. One is like a complete stranger rape situation where the offender's not known at all. One that might be an acquaintance. Somebody might have met somebody at a bar or online, and then there's a domestic situation. In 2018, there was only about 14% of our offenses where the suspect was not known at all, which means most of what we're investigating are somehow, you know, people that were known in some way. And just trying to condense. I think that's from a kind of quick high level. You know, that's pretty much it. The one thing I think you would ask a question, Susan, you know, why the drop in burglaries, you know, that has been occurring. I can't give you a completely accurate answer from the standpoint like I pinpoint one thing, but one of the things that we do think is happening is with the advent of camera technology in homes, which is becoming a more regular occurrence for us to deal with on whether it's a theft from auto or burglary. We are having, you know, this is the time of year we'll see package thefts. I'm already starting to see on Nextdoor people reporting those things, but a lot of those are getting captured on camera. So we believe there could be some correlation to the fact that people are using more technology. That's becoming readily apparent. I know on my house when you walk up the, you know, the Nest, it tells you that it's there, it lights up, and so, you know, I think there's a lot of, I don't want to at all take away from a lot of great investigative work and response that we have to incidents. But we do wonder if the security cameras are playing a role in that. Quick kind of wrap up. Year to date, our homicides are down thus far 33%. We are investigating another one that just we believe came to our attention over this weekend. So of course we'll see how the rest of the year goes. Our robberies are up slightly, about 1.7%. Our theft from autos is up, and you know, that's an ongoing campaign of trying. It's one of the most, or probably the most prolific crime as far as total numbers in Montgomery County, and so much of it has to do with information campaigns and trying to get people to lock their cars at night, you know, lock garages and things like that. And then a big part of it is most of the people that we deal with in that realm tend to be, if you can target the right offender, the repeat offenders that are going through and causing in a week, you know, maybe hundreds of incidents or events. If you can identify them, do good, you know, investigation, and then working with the judiciary to try to get the right remedy, you can have a big effect on those. So I'll wrap at that point and answer any questions.
Well, and not to I'd like to get back to the one statistic on rape again, please. Because Montgomery County has such great programs. I mean, we're probably one of the foremost places in America that have such wonderful programs. Is that does that encourage people? I would assume that encourages people to report in larger numbers than elsewhere if they don't have those types of programs. Would that be a fair thought?
I look at it, I agree with you, and I think if you look at the entire system of government, from the school system to county government to HHS and to, I think, a general openness in Montgomery County to help and to offer services and to create a welcoming environment. The Family Justice Center, is another great example. But for a lot of women, and this is a little bit of a snapshot you don't have in your packet, but if you look here, these are all just in 2019, the cases that were reported in 2019, but you can see all the different years that were reported. So it takes people, oftentimes women, but just people in general, a great deal of courage to step up. So even with all the services, they have to kind of, I think, find their moment where it's okay for them to, but I can't think of a more welcoming environment from the standpoint of that, whether it's the hospitals, the school system, through counselors or Family Justice Center. It's certainly, I think, as many barriers as we can take down. I think we have.
Good. Thanks. Any other questions? Please.
No, I think it'd be interesting as a follow-up, and I can request this in writing just to see, geographically how this breaks out within the county, because these are obviously county-wide statistics. It'd be helpful to know that.
Okay.
And it won't be a huge surprise. Obviously, the more densely populated elements of the county are likely going to have more elements or incidents. That's going to be logical, but it would be helpful to sort of break that down. And I think that the trust factor is so important between the community and law enforcement to be able to be comfortable to come forward to report crime. It's something we've talked actively about, and so having communities who, for whatever reason, may be less reluctant to report crime to government entities of any kind, and building that trust is critical, and this just kind of reinforces that.
Yeah, we have to keep our eye on that, because the moment I think you get complacent, you think everything's going okay, and meanwhile, you're just not getting that phone call because of that trust issue. Right. That's a constant. You just have to keep doubling down on it and building that.
Right.
Because you could have, and having worked in 6D, Cider Mill as a community in particular, that was a constant reminder to me, because you could see an entire neighborhood getting victimized, and if you didn't keep up on it, how that could just grow and grow and grow, and just get worse. So that's, yeah.
And there was fear of the police there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. And then I am interested at a later date to learn more about the new software that you plan on implementing.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be excited when hopefully we.
That'll actually be reviewed in depth as a full review of the CIP this year, and that's part of the Public Safety System Modernization project. So.
Yeah, we're excited.
Thank you guys very much for all you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you all
Yes,
very
sir.
much. And we will get back into this. Obviously, we didn't spend as much time on this as we did the other topics, not to take away from this important topic, but the other ones certainly needed to be addressed as well. So thank you all very much for what you do.
Do I get back to you?
I haven't seen it.